This podcast is intended to provide information for educational purposes only and to serve as a starting point for you to have a conversation with your personal physician. Nothing stated on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Consult with your physician before undertaking or changing any treatment plan.
Keep a running note on your phone or on a notepad. Anytime you experience something you're proud of, whether that's on the scale, a change in body composition, any of those other non-scale victory measures, jot it down, because then you can go back and remember that you are making progress. Hi there. Welcome back to the Pound of Cure Weight Loss podcast. Profits over patience.
Yeah.
Dr. Weiner, what are we talking about today?
Well, we talk about profits over patience
a lot.
I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like part of me, I started this podcast to like help educate people. And I always try to keep it from being like a little bit of a, pardon my language, but a bitch session about the healthcare system. But, we're in private practice. We run our own practice. We do our own billing. We deal with insurance companies. I mean, we are really, I think, just ground zero in terms of the healthcare crisis, because we see lots of patients in our practice and we're constantly battling insurance. We're fighting for these GLP-1 meds and we're seeing how it impacts people's lives. And it's so frustrating to me because we got the technology. It's there. Like, we cured obesity. I mean, we really have.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the industries that surround the payment for healthcare, whether it's pharma, health insurance. They've just extracted so much money. They're all publicly traded. Their CEOs are making $10 million, $20 million bonuses every year, maybe even more. And they must keep driving their stock price up. There's just this intense pressure on the people who run these companies to just be more and more and more profitable.
And less about the patient.
And so they have to. That's just the nature of healthcare, is if the companies providing the healthcare are making more money, then they're going to be giving less money and making less money available for healthcare. We have the money in the system. There's all the money we need to get everybody out there who's suffering from obesity, all the treatment that they should have. That money is there in the system. And if we just take it away from the massive pharma companies and the health insurance companies and direct it in the right way, we can do this. And so one of the hopes of this podcast is that we bring attention to this. And again, I keep saying this, but we've got an election cycle coming up. And I urge all of you out there to look over the candidates in your district, and not so much the presidential candidates, but your Congress people, your senators, your state Congress people, your state senators. Look at them and see what they stand for, and see if there's anybody out there who's going to help you with your healthcare issues. So let's move into their In the News segment. Our article comes from the New York Times, and it's very cleverly titled, "Is it time to say goodbye to BMI?" And
I'd say yes.
Yes.
I vote yes.
I think on one episode in the past, you said BMI is trash.
And I stand by it. It still is trash.
I think this article would certainly support that statement. So first of all, let's talk about what the BMI is. So body mass index is your weight over your height squared. And they use a metric system. And if you really got to break down the math, and I'm a math guy, so I like this kind of stuff, it's essentially designing or measuring the density of a cylinder. That's more or less where BMI comes from. And so really, some people are cylinders. If you're thin, you're a cylinder. But if you're overweight, you're not really shaped like a cylinder. And so they're looking at some other options. Now, BMI is 200 years old. So go back to 200 years ago. If you're going to calculate someone's BMI, they could do it, long division, long multiplication, you can figure it out. But now we have computers, we have calculators, we have a lot of other stuff we're going to cover on this episode. And so there's the option to come up with a much more sophisticated measure of obesity. I'll tell you, in the operating room, I'll go in, sometimes I'll do a BMI 60 case, and Boom, easy peasy, no problem whatsoever. And then I'll do a patient with a BMI of 38, and it's a difficult case. There's lots of abdominal fat. It's a very challenging surgery. And so I learned a long time ago that BMI alone is just not going to do it. You know, there's other things at play that determine the difficulty of a surgery, the severity of the obesity, the texture, the tissue, all of these things. So this article talks about the body roundness index, and it was developed by a mathematician, and she basically created a formula that essentially helps to measure the human body as a more of a circle, an oval, I think is actually what it's based on.
Which makes sense.
Makes sense, yeah. It's a much more complicated formula. You really have to plug it into a computer, and they do have some websites. If you look it up, Body Roundness Index, you can plug your info in, and it looks at first of all, it looks at your age, it looks at your gender, it looks at your waist circumference, it looks at your hip circumference. So it's looking at a lot of different measurements, and comes up with this Body Roundness Index. And normal's less than 3, but the number goes all the way to 20. I like the idea that there's a huge range.
It makes it be able to be more specific.
Yeah. Most people will fall between 1 and 10. And they've shown that a BRI, Body Roundness Index, greater than 7 shows increased mortality, increased cancer rates, increased risk of heart disease. We also see that I think what also is interesting, if your BRI is less than 3.4, and you're over 65, that also shows increased mortality.
Because we know that some fat, as you get into those elder years, has a protective effect.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we know these things, then this starts to that's consistent with things that we know. That also shows that this has some value. It's a complicated formula. It really is a measurement of your visceral fat, your intra-abdominal fat, and I think it's a much better way. I think there may be some. My hunch is this may be just a step along the way.
Might not be like apex.
But it was an interesting article. I like seeing it. They talk about how Arnold Schwarzenegger at his peak bodybuilding would have been classified as obese.
Yeah.
I think there's a large percentage of the football players are technically obese, even though these are really elite athletes. And so it detracts from the fact that there's a lot more to someone's health and fitness than just their height and their weight. I mean, what do you think? When you were in school, did they put a lot of stock in BMI, or did they kind of pull back and say, hey, maybe it's more complicated?
No, it absolutely was kind of one of those main measures.
Yeah.
And then it was, of course, discussion around, well, this is not a good measurement, but yet, well, that's what the healthcare system uses, and that's what's so ingrained in medicine. So you have to use it for malnutrition diagnoses, for obviously the diagnosis of obesity and different things like that. But of course, the conversations were had, but it was, that's, we know that BMI is trash, but you still have to use it anyway.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about this BRI.
Yeah.
It mostly measures the visceral fat, which is what you have to dig through, which can make the surgery more difficult, as opposed to subcutaneous fat, which is the fat underneath the skin.
Right. It's also the fat that's associated with heart disease, diabetes,
those comorbidities.
And the comorbidities as well. And so, we continue to use the same criteria for bariatric surgery. They're now using not the same criteria, but they're using BMI for GLP-1 indications. And so we continue to just be stuck in this BMI rut. It's going to take a long time for us to get out of it because, as you pointed out, there's dogma in medicine. And when you've been doing something for 200 years, it's hard to break out of it. It's in every EMR. That BMI is built into every EMR. You type in the height, you type in the weight, and it's going to spit out the BMI for you.
Yeah, well, and I recently was having a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about what, their goals, their long-term goals, and that kind of thing. And they were saying how they just want to get into the normal range of BMI. And I was like,
all the time.
Can we please, and then they had been lifting weights and really working on their nutrition, and their body composition was changing. And I was like, you're going to set yourself up for disappointment if we're really only looking at BMI and weight as your measure.
We see that a lot, particularly with women with 200 pounds, the Wonderland, right? So many women are like, I just need to have my weight start with a 1. But if you take a step back, if you zoom out, as you say, and look at it, well, that's because someone once defined a pound as whatever a pound is. And we decided on a base 10 numerical system.
Yeah.
And, so many assumptions have come that make that weight 200 pounds.
Your gravitational pull to the earth in that one moment.
Exactly. It's all, there's a lot of randomness to what makes 200 pounds.
Right.
But yet we are putting so much energy into that number as like my measure of success. And I am not successful if I'm 201, but I am successful if I'm 199. And there's so many other more important things.
And I often like to ask people like, okay, if you were to visualize yourself, would you rather see a certain number on the scale or see a certain physique or like look a certain way or feel a certain way, have your diabetes go away, whatever it is. So there are so many more powerful ways to measure progress and success.
Well, I think that segues very much into our nutrition segment.
Perfect.
So Zoe, what do we have today for nutrition?
Well, I did just want to further dig into those non-scale ways to measure success, specifically non-BMI, because we're going out with the BMI, right? So again, that BMI, as Dr. Weiner had explained, is a mathematical equation, basically a ratio of your height and your weight, if you will. What your weight does not take into consideration is your body composition, which is your fat mass versus your muscle mass, right? And so if we wanted to have a more accurate measure of progress, and it would be really great to be able to measure body composition changes. And there are many ways to do that. There's like the DEXA scan, that's pretty expensive for people to go and do. There are, different scanners like an in-body some gyms have, or a little handheld bioelectrical impedance. There's a pretty good margin of error with that, but it's better than, it's at least another data point, right? But we are now seeing these 3D scanners that basically take your measurements, map out your body composition, which is a really interesting and cool new way to see those changes over time in body composition.
Right. You can essentially measure every inch of your body.
Right. Because think about the human error. I say all the time, if you want to be tracking measurements over time, probably a better idea, or not a better idea than the scale, but in addition to, so we have more data points, is maybe taking your waist circumference. But of course, there's human error there. There's, again, all of those factors that could play a role into that number not being super accurate. But being able to measure all of the data points on your body and track that over time. And then not only having the measurements, but being able to see, you're with yourself all day, every day. Like, it's hard to see your body change when you have that close proximity. But if maybe monthly or quarterly, you see these changes in your body scanner, that to me is way not only cooler, but more significant to measure actual progress and change in body composition, especially if you're really dialed in with your nutrition and you're working on your building muscle and that kind of thing. So I think that's a very interesting area that I hope to see more of soon.
Yeah, I think especially with like weight loss stalls.
Yeah. Oh, all the time I hear people, I only lost a pound this month, but I lost 3 inches. What do I need to do? I'm like, that's amazing.
But something like that is these secondary endpoints that we're looking at, because it's not just about what happens on the scale every month, especially when you're looking monthly, which truthfully, even weighing yourself monthly, it's that you'll still see stalls. You'll still see a lot of noise in that signal. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's got to weigh themselves at least monthly. Like, it's hard to, when you're trying to do this, to weigh yourself less than once a month.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think these scanners are interesting, and some of these other methods of kind of measuring your body and comparing it's really helpful.
Yeah.
So.
But also knowing that, just to remember and staying motivated with the fact that there are so many aesthetic or non-body composition ways to measure your progress on this journey, your health markers, the medications you're able to get off of, your labs, your performance, whether you can walk up a flight of stairs without needing a break, or maybe you signed up for a 5K, or you're now lifting 20 pounds instead, right? There are so many markers.
Yeah.
And so I just want to leave my nutrition segment with this little tip to keep you motivated on those days that, of course, we're all going to experience down, like feeling down, feeling frustrated, whether it's through a stall or just, whatever. Keep a running note on your phone or on a notepad. Anytime you experience something you're proud of, whether that's on the scale, a change in body composition, any of those other non-scale victory measures that I was explaining, or even just like a little aha moment, you're like, oh my gosh, I was able to just bend down and put my sock on. So anytime you have a little like glimmering, exciting moment, jot it down, because then you can go back and remember that you are making progress.
Right.
Reinforce to yourself that you are doing the right things, and it's okay to feel a little bit down, but just kind of like reigniting that and pumping yourself back up. Like, yeah, I have done all of this. I have made this much progress, and just kind of reminding yourself, I find really beneficial in terms of reigniting that motivation.
Yeah. The human brain is kind of screwed up. That one piece of bad news, that one bad thing that happens to you, that we'll let that ruin our whole day, and we'll focus on that for the rest of the day, even if 3 good things happen to us on that same day.
Just same thing with compliments versus negative comments.
Absolutely. Right. 10 people
fixate on that one.
Totally. 10 people say you look fantastic, and one person kind of gives you a nasty look, and all you can think about all day is that nasty look. Yeah, you're right. So I think that's a great tip for that. So, all right. So our economics of obesity segment is next. This really comes from a MedPage Today article, and the title of the article, and we've talked a lot about PBMs and how crooked they are, and how much they're compromising our healthcare, and really where the title of our episode, Profits Over Patients, comes from. PBMs overpay their own pharmacies to the detriment of insurers, taxpayers, FTC says. That's even a little tricky because the PBMs are the insurers. So the PBM, we've talked about this a lot. I'll just kind of give everybody a quick reminder of what a PBM or pharmacy benefit manager is. This is that Express Scripts, that OptumRx. This is, there's a separate phone number you have to call if you're getting prescription coverage versus if you're seeing your doctor. That's your PBM you're calling. That's that separate phone number. And they regulate the price that you pay and what you're covered for the medication. Now, why do we even have PBMs? PBM's job is to negotiate with the pharma industry so that you get the lowest price possible for the medication. Now, we all say, well, our insurance company pays it, I don't pay it, but that's not how insurance works. If you're paying a lot for it, your insurance is going to go up. Mm-hmm. And everybody, look at your health insurance premiums over the last 10 years. They have skyrocketed. Look at your copays on medications. They have skyrocketed. Look at the price of medications in this country. They have skyrocketed. So if PBM's job is to keep the price of prescription drugs low, they're doing a really crappy job. And so this also points to why we're seeing this. So what's happened, and I think a big problem that we've had, is that the health insurance companies have bought all the PBMs. So there's 6 big PBMs, and they're responsible for, I think, 94% of all pharmacy claims come through the 6 big PBMs. So we really have essentially not a monopoly because there's 6 companies, but they're behaving like monopolies. So CVS Caremark, I think they're the biggest. That's owned by Aetna. So Aetna owns Aetna. Mm-hmm. It owns CVS, and it owns Caremark. It owns the whole pipeline.
Every single step.
It's got all of it. And Cigna owns Express Scripts. OptumRx is owned by United Healthcare. These 3, CVS, Cigna, and United, that's 79% of all the prescriptions in the U.S. Humana Pharmacy, MedImpact, and Prime Therapeutics are the other 3. So in the article, they talk about Zytiga, which is a prostate cancer medicine. The wholesale price of Zytiga is $229. However, if they look at the top 3 PBMs, the average price is $6,000. Wholesale $229. Average price.
It's a cancer medication.
Cancer medication. So they know cancer's money.
Gonna get paid
Got
for it.
cancer, man. I'm sorry. Oh, we gotta pay. It's cancer. Oh, we gotta pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, whatever it costs, we're gonna pay.
We're gonna
It's
figure
cancer.
it out and make it happen.
Right. Obesity, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Like cancer.
It's just eat less.
Yeah. Totally eat less. So they pay twice as much for this medication than if you go to an unaffiliated pharmacy. So what are the unaffiliated pharmacies? It's like your Safeway here in Tucson. It's your grocery store pharmacies. In the past, you would say, your locally owned pharmacies. Those are all gone.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Do you remember that? I mean, I think you're still.
Well, I also grew up in a town of 10,000 people.
Right. But there was a pharmacy, and it was a locally owned small business. That person who owned it was often the guy who was giving you your medicines. They were a pharmacist. That doesn't exist anymore. And so what happened with those is that the PBMs started buying up all the pharmacies, and they went to these local owned pharmacies like, oh, we're paying you garbage for these medications. Yeah. We're not paying you anything. And they essentially ran them out of business. And what happened is they more or less ruined their business, and they're like, oh, we're CVS, we'll buy you.
Yeah.
Kind of mob boss stuff. We're going to ruin your business and then offer to buy you up. And so that's why there's a CVS on every corner, and all of these local pharmacies have kind of been bought up by CVS and Walgreens, and even things like Rite Aid. There used to be, I feel like Rite Aids used to be around, but they just didn't play the insurance game right, and they got pushed out of this. So all of this money is passed on to you. It's passed on to taxpayers. It's passed on to employers. It's passed on to employees. There's really, when you receive your salary, your payment, you're actually receiving two different ways. You get your paycheck, which is what goes in your bank account, but then you also get your health insurance. If you get your health insurance through the employer, that's what you get. And so your employer is paying money to the health insurance company. If your employer didn't have to pay as much money to the health insurance company, they could pay you more wages. And that would absolutely happen. I mean, we run our practice. I know, like when I calculate what's someone's salary, I have to calculate their health insurance cost into this. So this money that's being spent is your money. It would otherwise go to you, whether it's paid by your insurance company or not. And here's the trick that they pay. And we've all seen this. Oh, you want a 90-day supply? What do you have to do if you want a 90-day supply? You got to use our mail order pharmacy. You got to use our Optum Rx. Oh, if you go through Optum Rx, the copay is lower.
Yeah.
That $6,000 medicine, instead of a $60 copay, we'll charge you a $40 copay. But we're charging your employer, your insurance company, $6,000. And so they incentivize you through longer, because who wants to go to the pharmacy every month?
Right.
Right? Through 90-day prescriptions, through reduced copays, they incentivize you to use their own pharmacies, which they then pay a substantially higher rate to for the same drug that they do if you went to a locally or non-PBM owned pharmacy. And so there's no question PBMs are doing a terrible job at the thing that they're there for, which is keeping the cost of medications lower for Americans. That's the job. That's why PBMs exist.
They're doing a terrible job.
A terrible job. So I have a chart, and it's the monthly list prices for weight loss drugs in the U.S. compared to every other country. And this, to me, this is just infuriating. And we know this, the list price of Ozempic, which is a diabetes version of semaglutide, is $936, and Wegovy is $1,349. So first of all, already same exact drug, $400 upcharge.
Yeah.
Just because it's for obesity. But then we look at what it costs in other countries. Canada, Ozempic, $936, $147. I want a Canadian PBM. How do I sign up for a Canadian PBM? Right? Sweden, $96.
It's not just that the US is double. It's like
It's not double.
it's
five times higher.
Exactly. It's sickening.
Sickening. And so these medicines literally are 5 times more expensive in our country than in any other country. And it's not even twice. I would love if it was twice as expensive.
Fine.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Twice as Japan's the next highest country for Ozempic, $169. $340 for Ozempic. Boom, done. Everybody. Yeah.
Make it happen.
So it is time for us to start looking for alternatives to our traditional PBMs. These big 6 PBMs, they are not doing anybody any good unless you own stock in the companies or work for the companies. And so this stuff has to stop. And I think it's time for us to write letters to your Congress people to start taking a stand against this and recognize what's happening. There's plenty of money in the system. It's just not being allocated appropriately. So, all right. That wraps up another podcast.
We keep ending on such positive notes.
Yeah. But I think it's important. We got to know.
No, I know. And I have learned so much throughout this podcast as well about the insurance and the PBMs and all of those things. So, I mean, I know that our listeners are getting so much value out of it. And I think it's learning, which we're providing the information, but then that call to action of, okay, what can I do to actually make a difference? And writing a letter, trying to get some change. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we really need is some politicians who are not bought and sold by the health insurance company and the farm industry.
But how many politicians do you think actually take the time to understand all of that and care in the first place?
So if you're interested in this, Google Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was the Lions running back. Bernie Sanders letter to the CEO of Novo Nordisk, September 24th. He's going to be testifying in a Senate hearing. And it's a great letter, and he hits on all of these points. Okay. Like he nails each and every one of these points about the cost of these medications in our country versus other countries, the difference in the price, whether it's for diabetes or obesity for the same exact medication. And so it really only through this type of thing, only by being brought in before Senate, through legislation is this going to change. Yeah. That's the only way it's going to change, because it's being allowed because of the laws we have, and only by changing those laws can we put an end to PBMs, which is honestly they're really stealing from the American public. So,
well, I'm excited for us to be able to update on that next after that happens, and we can do a podcast segment on it.
All right. If you're having trouble with your getting coverage for weight loss medications, or if you're able to do it successfully, let us know. Drop us a line on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, on our YouTube channel, through our website. If you have a question you want to see us answer on the podcast, please reach out to us.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.